And eventually I chose math and comp sci and cryptography. It was just fun because you could go to like Bitcoin Talk and talk to pretty much everybody. And it's been a lot of fun kind of watching this movement grow from basically nothing. So if you want this to live, it needs to be able to upgrade itself.
Charles, welcome. Nice to meet you.
Very
good. And before we get to get this, before you became Charles Hoskinson, who were you up before you got into the industry, and then what piqued your interest in cryptography and blockchain technology?
Sure. So originally, way back in the day, I was actually from Hawaii. I was born on the island of Maui and grew up in a little town called Makawa. And actually, I lived just 5 minutes away from Komodas. If anybody knows where those donuts are, I always orient myself based on where the best food is. And I had a nice childhood there, and then moved to the mainland into Colorado, and I kind of grew up in Colorado. So it was very nice actually starting in Hawaii and then going to Colorado, because you kind of get that small island town feel, and then you go Colorado, it's massive and big and there's snow and shit like that. I was homeschooled throughout my whole life. I graduated early from high school at 15, and then I went to Front Range and finished there at 18. And after I graduated, I went to Metro and CU Boulder, and I wanted to be a mathematician. So I was in this bachelor's master's thing and took a lot of graduate classes, took a lot of undergrad classes, and also I was debating, do I be a doctor or a mathematician? My dad's a doctor, my brother's a doctor, and eventually I chose math and comp sci and cryptography, because there was no crypto back then. And I just kind of got lost into the bureaucracy of academia. I was like, well, what's the point of this? Go get a PhD, and then you go be a postdoc, and then you go become assistant faculty, and then you become faculty. And after 20 years, you're like, the best you've gotten is a nice office. You haven't really changed the world. You haven't done anything interesting. I was also a political firebrand back then. I was really interested in the Ron Paul campaign, the Liberty Movement. So I read about Austrian economics and, full reserve banks and, deflationary monetary policy and these types of things. I said, that makes a lot of sense, that over time my money gets worth more, because currently over time my money is worth less. Mm-hmm. And, then 2008 happened and the whole world went to hell. And I said, oh, okay, well, all these bankers are now going to jail and they're actually going to reset the system. Shows you how naive I was. So nothing happened, and I got so remarkably frustrated. I was kind of disenfranchised, looking for, something else in life. And then at the same time, the open source movement was really starting to get good. I was following the Peer-to-Peer Foundation. I was following the Linux project and they were doing Apache Linux Foundation. Git had just come out. So there was really this grand awakening in peer-to-peer open source. So Bitcoin kind of rode on the back of that. And I first became aware of it around, late 2010, early 2011. And I said, that'll probably never work, because it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. It has to work. So you have to get to a certain scale before people take it seriously, but you need people to take it seriously for it to be serious. Mm. So I said, I'll mine it and I'll buy a lot of it and just kind of fuck around. So I built a miner. I had one of those crossfire systems, because at the time the AMD cards were the best for mining. And I had like 5850s, a quad crossfire together with a Ryzen processor. And when I put it all together, it was like 1.2 gigahashes, which at the time was a very significant amount. I used slush pool. So I was in very early days in the space, and it was just fun because you could go to like Bitcoin Talk and talk to pretty much everybody who was an OG. And at the time, nobody took themselves seriously because Bitcoin was functionally worthless. It was like less than $1 for most of that, and then $4 a coin. And actually, we had our first collapse during that time period. Bitcoin went up to $30 and then collapsed down to $4. Oh, no. Everybody's like, I lost all my money. Bitcoin is a scam and all these things. In fact, I remember there was a StarCraft tournament where the fifth prize was 25 Bitcoin.
I remember that.
Yeah, the first prize was like $100. And like, man, sometimes coming in fifth place really, really works for you.
Right.
So then eventually I left. And then I came back in 2013 when Bitcoin, after the Cypriot crisis, and it became clear that Bitcoin was really starting to become successful. And I said, all right, well, I need to do something. So I created an educational course. It was called Bitcoin, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Crypto. And I gave it away for free, and I got 80,000 students. And that's how I got to know everybody really well. And that was the launching pad for me to do my first crypto project, which was not Ethereum. It was actually BitShares. And I did that with Dan Larimer, ironically, of all people. And because it was called Project Invictus. I said, what could make Bitcoin or crypto undefeatable? And they said, well, I asked all my students in my course, and I got a bimodal distribution. About half the students were saying, hey, we think stable coins, you need to have value stability. And the other half were like, well, exchanges are a huge problem, because this was right around when Mt. Gox was getting frothy and people are getting worried about it. So decentralized exchange. So BitShares actually in 2013 was the first concept of a merger of an algorithmic stablecoin and a DEX. We had that before Ethereum. It was just way ahead of its time. And we also created proof of stake, delegated proof of stake back then. So there was a lot of really good ideas in that project. Unfortunately, it just couldn't get over the line. So after that, I did Ethereum, and everybody knows about that. And there's a big debate of whether I'm a narcissistic, sociopathic monster who eats children for a living, or was a good guy. It just depends on whose book you read. And then after that, I formed Input Output, where I said, I really want to do a first principles research company where we integrate into the universities, we integrate into formal methods, and we build proper protocols. And we created Cardano on the back of that, and it grew from 2 people to 700-person company. And obviously, there's millions of people in the Cardano ecosystem, and the rest is history. But it's been a wild ride. It's just a lot of frustration, a lot of political anger, and just a love of rigor in mathematics and formalism, and a love of cryptography, and a love of open source, community. Bring those people together, talk to people, always be open and willing, because you meet a person in 5 years, that person could be a billionaire. That person could be a huge person. So everybody you should respect, and everybody you should try to get to know. And it's been a lot of fun kind of watching this movement grow from basically nothing, where nobody took us seriously, to now nation states have to pass laws and have a crypto strategy. These things. It's been a wild ride, man.
Bet. So for time purposes, because there's a lot to unpack there, I wanted to ask you about homeschooling really quick. Mm-hmm. What was that like? Did you enjoy it? And do you think other parents, if it's within their means and capacity to do it, should also take that route with their children?
I think that is the single best thing you can do for your kids. I think the current education system is just an indoctrination factory. The reason I am what I am today, and I'm able to do what I do, is because I never grew up with somebody telling me I can't. It's a pretty insane idea that you're just going to go and change the entire world financial system and all the political systems of the world. If I grew up with K through 12 normal education, I would basically believe that all these things are fixed and rigid and speak when spoken to. These they don't care about creativity, critical thinking. They don't care at all about creating thinking people that are capable of challenging society. They care about indoctrination. That's all K through 12 is. And it's never been a better time to homeschool, because you have Coursera, Khanmigo with Khan Academy. You have the globalization of education. Like, there's a person who works for me, and he has one of his kids he's homeschooling. And I got him as a gift a math tutoring course from India. And they basically teach you like Vedic math and all these things, and you can do like mental calculation. And I think his daughter is like 10 years old, 11 years old, can add like 4 or 5 digit numbers up in her head, multiply numbers, all these types of things. And that's just a technique for 3,000 years they've had in India. They don't teach it in the United States, but the math Olympiads over there know it. And, a 10-year-old can pick it up. Just think about that, how powerful that is to have those capabilities. So if you care about your child's education, not only can you do a significantly better job because you have access to the world's knowledge, you can teach your child that they have the ability to change things and be creative and critically think. And I'm a huge advocate of it. And, what you always do in society is, if you want to understand who's in charge, look who you can't criticize. And if you want to understand how you're controlled, look at where they try to restrict your abilities. So they don't let you take psychedelics, and they're trying to get rid of homeschooling. It's like, well, that makes people more creative. So there's certainly a problem here, right? And I'm glad we at least have some freedoms that we can keep pushing that forward. But every year they try to get rid of it. And they keep saying things like kids won't be as socialized. Well, if your vision of socialization is a 6-year-old can't speak to each other wearing a mask and in a social distancing ring, I don't think we're really having the same conversation here. In fact, in Canada, they actually told school children as young as like 6 or 7 that they aren't allowed to talk to each other because it'll spread COVID. This is how insane these administrators are. They're evil people. I'm sorry, when you come and say we can do something for $5,000 that normally costs $20,000, and they say we can't even talk about it because it'll cut our budget. it's not about education for children. It's about preservation of power for a small group of people, and preservation of an institution that doesn't really care if it produces value for people.
Music to my ears, Charles. You campaigned for Ron Paul, and I think you once said that left, right, they're both part of the same bird. I used to once say that left, right, they're two fangs of the same snake. And do you think we have any potential candidates coming up that kind of echo the same ethos that Ron did back in the 2000s?
The problem is you can't really replicate a guy like Ron Paul. Even his son couldn't do it, Rand, because Ron is the product of execution. It's one thing to say it, like Vivek and these other guys, they say lots of stuff and it sounds great. The problem is they're young and they have no track record. Ron, the reason why he was effective was that he didn't really focus on marketing. He focused on principles. So you could look at a 30-year history and they call him Dr. No. If you're a lobbyist, you'd never even go and talk to him because he understood there was no way to persuade him to compromise. He was uncompromised. At a time when people were very afraid of the government that seemed to represent a group of people that's not us, we wanted to have pure candidates that value principles and consistency matter. So there's certainly a lot of people that want the throne, but my view is you can't change the system at the federal level. The only way we're going to fix it is at the constitutional level. We actually need to have a new constitutional convention for the United States and rewrite the federal government to account for two things the founding fathers didn't conceive. One was this concept of a gargantuan federal bureaucracy. There's no control structures in American politics to deal with it. So basically, they have unlimited authority and they transcend political office. If they don't like a president, they just hide for 4 years or 8 years. And then they come back up and restart what they want to do. And they can lie to presidents and they can lie to the executive branch. And it's gotten so bad that the bureaucracy, when they go before Congress, they don't even answer questions anymore. They mock them, even though that's the oversight body. Gensler is a great example, at the SEC and Congress. I mean, in a prior age, you would not have a chairman be so brazen to the extent that there was members of the House of Representatives proposing not only to fire him, but remove his job altogether and replace it with a new one. But there's other things like health and human services and the immigration policy and et cetera, where it's just become very clear that they don't care and there's no accountability. And you can't change that by electing a new president. You can change that by changing the way we manage the entire bureaucracy at the constitutional level. You need term limits in place. The way a president is elected needs to be fundamentally changed. I don't think we should have the electoral system. What we should do is every state elects a nominee, and then they run them in a runoff system, and you pick your top five, and it's like a playoffs, with football. And that works really well, actually, for a lot of things. We have a lot of candidates, but what does that guarantee is that every state gets some representation. You have the Wyoming candidate, the California candidate, these things. And what's really cool about that also is that you can actually segregate private funding versus federal funding. So you could say unlimited private funding during the state level elections, but that at the federal level, everybody gets the same amount of money, the same process, these types of things, because they're now official representative of that state for the presidency. And then also I liked what the founding fathers did, where the runner-up was the vice president. So you get political diversity there. And, a lot of little things like that, term limits for House and Senate as well, balanced budget amendment. Here's another thing that just blows my mind. All you have to do to balance the federal budget, just cut the budget across the board, every federal agency, 5% per year for a few years. And eventually you actually get to a surplus. That's all you got to do. But the problem is they never can conceive of this. But you do this all the time in business. Like Elon Musk takes over Twitter and he gets rid of 90% of the staff, and now he's rebuilding the entire company. It's like a startup again, and it'll take a few years to get restarted. But if he gets it right, there's a lot of value there. Well, we can't do that in the federal government. We have 16 intelligence agencies right now, 16, and then they say when the 9/11 Commission came out, they wrote this big report and they said, we have too many intelligence agencies. So what we should do? Create another intelligence agency, the Director of National Intelligence, and that'll solve the problem. Not consolidate and shut down, but rather, create more. So the closest thing we have to immortality, I steal this line from Reagan, is a federal bureaucracy. And if you create a federal agency, it will never die. It'll live forever. So you have to, through the constitutional level, get rid of that stuff. And then once you have it, the new government will actually be able to chip away at the bureaucracy, and you end up getting a lot more efficiency and efficacy in a much smaller federal bureaucracy, which means liberty grows. Every time you have more bureaucracy, liberty dies.
And that seems to be their solution, more bureaucracy.
Yes. Every person running for president is like, I will make government bigger to solve government's big problems.
Charles, I feel like your vision with Cardano is to shift some of these paradigms and fix some of the issues that you and I are discussing today. Before we talk about Cardano, I'm sure you're asked this question a lot, but what were some of the difference of opinions that you had with your fellow co-founders at Ethereum that ultimately led you to building out your own ecosystem?
Well, there was a philosophical difference of, is it, does immutability matter? This was the whole Ethereum Classic versus Ethereum thing. And Vitalik says, move fast and break things. And if we want to rewrite history to preserve and promote adoption, let's go ahead and do that. Bitcoin, we survived for a long time where hacks occurred, people's money got stolen, and never once did anybody in Bitcoin land change anything. So I was on the, once you've set certain social contracts, you don't, unless you have a good on-chain governance system, have the right to change those social contracts. So that was one area that we vehemently disagreed on. There are a lot of technical disagreements, like I think you should be in control of your money always, your ADA always. And so liquid non-custodial staking is a huge deal. Ethereum, it's massively centralized. It is custodial, and it's not really that liquid. You have to create a synthetic asset to get liquidity. And actually, I think they'll end up being regulated differently. There's some regulators that are saying if you're under a custodial staking model, you're actually a bank and should follow Basel III. And there's others who are not. They actually are not banks, and they don't need to follow that. So there were actually very substantial differences of opinion about control and consent. On-chain governance versus off-chain governance. Vitalik does not like on-chain governance. He wrote blog posts about it. I think it's a fool's errand if you don't do it, because how do you coordinate a system at a scale of hundreds of millions of people? You're just going to have a dictator who decides everything. Is that really decentralized? Or are you going to have anarchy like Bitcoin where you can never change anything? These are programmable systems. Every few years, they have to have massive updates to stay competitive, or else you get forks and other projects outcompete you. So if you want this to live, it needs to be able to upgrade itself. Okay, well, what's your upgrade process? So governance is another huge differential. And then obviously the programming model. These are high assurance contracts, and they're maximally attacked, because everybody can see the code. Everybody has a strong financial incentive to try to break them. So you need a model that promotes determinism, easy verification, and the smallest possible attack surface. So extended UTXO in a functional paradigm versus an imperative paradigm in a global state system like EVM. So we pretty much disagree on almost everything, but we do agree on some universal principles like the value of open source and, the value of community and growing these things. But there's very dramatic design differences between Cardano and Ethereum. And I'm starting to see a shift where people are agreeing with us more, especially on some of the big things like high assurance. Our reliability uptime is remarkable. Our consensus model is remarkable. And it's not like we won't get all the good, cool shit that Ethereum has. It's just we're going to get it in a much better way, and we're going to get it in a much more sustainable long-term way. Like we have a really strong layer 2 game because of state channel isomorphism with extended UTXO, which you cannot replicate with EVM. I know that because they tried with Plasma. That was their whole strategy before they pivoted to rollups and Casper. So we get that, and that's a real thing. And there's papers to show how that works. The use of peer review also meant we got a much stronger consensus algorithm, which we know how to upgrade over time to basically do everything everybody's ever wanted, but not have a Solana-style chain that collapses every year and it's 200 terabytes and all these problems, or Casper where it takes 8 years to do the rollout and your money's locked and nobody's happy. And even the founder of the system doesn't want to use his own consensus protocol. We don't have any of that, because of very good design decisions. It's not like we're the smartest people in the room. It's just we created a process to talk to the smartest people in the room. 168 researchers have participated writing papers for Cardano. The enemies of Cardano, they like saying it's just Charles lying to people on Twitter all day. But behind that, there's 180 research papers by 168 researchers in more than 25 institutions across the world. The sun never sets on Cardano research. And we are speeding up, not slowing down. And look at all the things that launched this year: Marlowe, Hydra, Mithril. We got Laces really evolving. All the standards are getting really nice, like the SIP 30, SIP 95 is underway for voting. SIP 1694 is really making a lot of progress. The members-based organization is just getting started, Intersect. So a lot of fundamental stuff is growing exponentially, and it's in parallel. So we're number one for GitHub commits, and our TVL's up over 200%, 8 million native assets, I think 22 billion ADA staked. These are all indicia of a very healthy, stable, growing evangelistic ecosystem. And this is in a mega bear market where literally the US government is trying to kill crypto. So imagine
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
where that goes when we're on the other side of the bear market. This means we're going to have rapid growth and adoption. So I don't really lose a lot of sleep over like how do you beat Ethereum. I think they're going to naturally die because their governance model is bad. You cannot survive with bad governance. In fact, when I was the CEO of Ethereum in 2014, I'll tell you this, the chain I worried most about was NXT. And it taught me a great lesson. Nobody remembers it anymore. But at the time, they had proof of stake. They had native assets. So they had their own color coins implementation. They were working on smart contracts called automated transactions. And they had just this amazing momentum as a community when they had nothing to a huge thing. The problem was they had shit governance. And so they fractured into Crypty and Lisk and eventually Scorex, which became Ergo, and then Wave. So like 8 cryptocurrencies came out of NXT. And there were a lot of amazing ideas there. And if they had good governance, that would have grown exponentially and become in the top 10 and become a huge thing. It also had a bad distribution of the initial token. So those two things kill you. Well, Ethereum had a pretty good distribution, but the governance just sucks. It's not clear how to get this thing to either quickly or to progress to get old point, especially if the cult of personality around Vitalik dies out and the vision dies out. So, and also they're being eaten alive by their layer 2s. They have parasitic loads there where those chains don't really provide a lot of value to the Ether holders or the Ether network, and they draw transaction volume off. Whereas the sidechain model that we're moving towards, if you run a sidechain, you pay your staking rewards to the ADA holders. So if we have a broad ecosystem, holding ADA, you get 50 to 100 tokens or whatever inside that ecosystem. So that means that we have an incentive to partner and attract other chains to come and use our infrastructure for trust and security. So I think there's a lot of incentives engineering problems that exist there. And they like to point and say, well, you don't have EIP 1559 and fee markets. Well, yeah, we wrote tiered pricing, we wrote Babel fees. It'll get implemented when it's needed and it's underway in these things. Mithril, we already have a version 2. The paper is almost finished. We're submitting it to Europe Crypt. And we took ideas from Algorand's compact certificates. The guy who wrote it actually took a sabbatical and came over to University of Edinburgh and spent 6 months with us, Leo Raisin, and we now have Mithril 2, and it's significantly better. And we'll pull it into the node, and it'll be an amazing data availability primitive that'll be used by all the smart contracts. So there's a vision there, and it's a methodical one that's over 1 million lines code and proven on a regular basis. Ethereum doesn't have that. They will in the whole world. And ultimately, design they have to be backward coded. That's it's a very bad programming model. Global state distributed system is a super stupid idea. Non-deterministic fees in a distributed system is a super stupid idea. You do that locally. So make it the app's problem. Don't make it the network's problem, because then it's just so much more complexity when you shard to deal with these types of things. But that's a computer science thing, and unless you have like an advanced degree in distributed systems or cryptography and you've thought about it for a while, you don't really understand why that's so important. Meanwhile, on the Cardano side, it's like we went to the guys who invented the shit and hired them. Mm-hmm. Like Haskell, like the guys who created the programming language work for me. So we hired these guys and they've been around for 40 years. They're really smart. In fact, Phil Wadler just got a society. Same bot I was a member of, and all these other super prominent, famous people that were members of, like Babbage and Stephen Hawking and et cetera, et cetera. It's like these are the guys that are literally thinking about Cardano on a daily basis. And there's just so many of them that you forget to even mention their names, because there's 168 of them doing actual research, and the scholarship is unparalleled. So, these are our philosophical differences. I say them in earnest because I'd like to see their project get better. We disagree very strongly. If we can collaborate in certain places, we certainly do. And when the community hears that, the only thing they're going to hear is one or two words, a headline, Like, for example, when I tweet, that they have a really bad consensus protocol, then all these articles come out that are AI generated, and then it ends up on cryptocurrency Reddit, and they say Charles is an egotistical asshole, et cetera, et cetera. How is that productive to the ecosystem or industry? It's not. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't make anybody better. These are legitimate criticisms, and there's no way to get them through without success. So we're just focused on building Cardano. We're speeding up. We're number one for GitHub commits, and this ecosystem will thrive. We'll continue to grow, and at some point we'll get so big they can't ignore it. And then they're going to have to answer some very difficult questions about why they made design decisions the way they did. And then when they create Ethereum 3 and copy all of our stuff, then I guess that'll be the final say.
Your point of departure was slow and steady wins the race, quality over quantity. Charles, we are out of time, but I had so many things I wanted to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about Bitcoin, Web3 gaming. I want to talk about memes, anti-aging. You have an anti-aging hospital. You have a restaurant. So we
have a little bit more time. There's so many people in the space, and I think I'll give these guys a few more minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So then I'll ask you a high-level overview question for Cardano. What is the grand vision? Where do you see the ecosystem 5 to 10 years from now as it pertains to economies, as it pertains to our systems, and it pertains to anything else that you think the world needs a legitimate paradigm shift in?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'd say there are 3 pillars that have to get constantly reinvented and reinforced. So one, you have to get the governance component correct. And so every day you have to wake up and say, have we constructed a governance process that's not perfect, but it's recursive, meaning that when we find problems, we fix the problems, and the system over time gets more effective and wise. Effective means whatever the goals are that we're pursuing, we're better able at achieving them. So the collective intelligence is very strong. And wise, or next year, these are the things that lay very strong foundations to get that done. Second, there's just a lot of stuff to build. There's all these amazing protocols like enhancements to Hydra, Mithril, recursive snarks, the sidechain strategy, input endorsers, Babel fees, tiered pricing. So that engineering engine has to keep speeding up and maintain its principles. And then there's just a lot of house cleaning in that line. Like, for example, if we want to see a multi-client environment, we have to get good active specifications across the whole protocol and probably do things like drop Byron support and figure out migration there, because that makes it much simpler and easier for people to build a Go client, a Rust client. You find that polyglot ecosystem that comes out. So there's an enormous house of work on engineering and execution that needs to be done. And the third thing is we have to kind of predict the future if we're going to win the future. So predicting the future is, where is the 4th generation going? And I would argue it's RVTP, post-quantum, and multi-resource consensus. So RVTP is regulated value transfer protocols. So these are things where regulation comes to DeFi, but it comes in a way that preserves decentralization and self-sovereign identity. So we have some ideas on how to do that. This is why you need technology like Midnight, because basically it allows you to preserve human rights, the freedom of association, commerce, and expression, but create a model where you still have it workable in a society. And whoever figures that out first, you just get all the apps, because all these apps have to upgrade if they want to preserve liquidity and market access to a system that supports that capability. So there'll be a mass migration in the direction there. Post-quantum, it's going to have to come at some point. And there's quantum technologies like one-shot signatures and other things, which are tremendously useful for the system. But we have to do a lot of work to get there, and that's the next big challenge, because those capabilities are going to come online in the 2030s, and we have to protect ourselves. And multi-resources, where you don't talk about proof of work versus proof of stake and this fucking weirdo holy war that the cult of Satoshi loves. You can just combine them together. You can have useful proof of work with proof of stake, with proof of storage, and that's what really kills the Infiras and the Alchemies and these guys that run off-chain infrastructure, who are the silent centralizers of the entire ecosystem. So I think those are the 3 things that we have to embrace. Minotaur gives us multi-resource consensus. We've worked with NIST on post-quantum standards. We run with the best of them. We know where all the bodies are buried, trade-off profile there. It's just a matter of pulling a coalition of different companies together, like Algorand and others, and getting it done, because they've already done some good work with Falcon. And then with respect to the first category, it's just, you just chip away at that, So these are the things we think about, and I'd say if you could achieve it, then there's that mass migration, there's that mass adoption. Because you look at the Citigroup report they wrote for cryptocurrency, they say by 2030, trillions of dollars of value is going to enter the cryptocurrency space through security tokens and identity-based products and these types of things. Well, we're really the only game in town that I think has the holism to capture that value drift and flow. Because, you have RVTP, you have the ability to do a security token. By the way, you can get a lot of this stuff for free just by paying attention to the NFT space. What's so crazy is like NFTs, they pay royalties and they have intellectual property and they restricted ownership, identified ownership, verified NFTs, these types of things. Well, it's basically the same concept as a security when you think about it. It's not necessarily a security, but it has the same functional and technical requirements as what a security. So what we'll do in 2024 through Intersect is have a working group to expand the Cardano native asset standard to include security token and NFT support. And then we can create basically assets that have those capabilities. And whenever the security token revolution comes, we can capture that part of the revolution. But this kind of prescient thinking where you create structures that are self-evolving, it's very easy then to absorb capabilities. And when people are ready for those capabilities, they come in. Now, the biggest issue I think we need to resolve, and Intersect can help solve this, is marketing. It's not the case that we're behind. In fact, we're radically ahead in terms of philosophy and ideas. We're in the right ballpark. It's the case that there's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just straight up lies that are told. Like the one transaction per block. I had a friend who was at Ethereum developers working group up in New York just a few weeks ago. And the Ethereum people there, Solidity developers, they say, you write on Cardano? It's like, how do you build dApps? You only get one transaction a block. They actually believe this. It's not like they're just shit talking. No, they actually believe this, and they thought it was impossible to achieve concurrency in our model. It's like, no, we have shit running. And showed code and everything. Is like, oh, we didn't know. So there's just so much misinformation and lies. It's ghost chain, no TVL, no dApps, no growth, no developers. It's impossible to write code in Plutus. There's no diversity. There's no community support in projects. It's a cult. It's all a lie. It's the next FTX. It's the next Luna. By the way, the people that supported Luna are the ones who are attacking Cardano, like Crypto Banter, Rand and his guys. He was telling everybody how it's the next big thing, and they all lose all their money. And then he has the audacity to say Cardano is going to become a bad project and fall apart. It's just it would be offensive if it wasn't comical. And I'm just fucking tired of it. And
I can only imagine.
The community is really starting to get evangelistic and aggressive. And once all this decentralized governance stuff really gets laid out, every year there will be a budget. There's a budget process, and they're going to decide the pie chart and how much goes to development, how much goes to marketing. But there's definitely going to be some serious money into marketing and adoption. Dedicated organizations are going to get set up, and we're going to go tell the world who we are, because we're getting really tired of being lied about and getting really tired of being attacked every single day, 24 hours a day, when we're the ones who have liquid non-custodial staking, and they're the ones where they don't, and the founder of the system doesn't even want to use his own consensus protocol. We're the ones who are getting a ton of organic growth and a lot of great community projects, and they're the ones who are using pre-mined coins to astroturf a multi-million-dollar a year, multi-billion-dollar budget to basically pay people to develop. Sorry, you have to pay for it. She doesn't love you. So we need to really take a moment and take a step back and resolve that problem. So we already have the vision, we have the roadmap, we have the technology as an ecosystem, and there's a great group of people across the world in more than 100 countries, dozens of different organizations that are working hard every day, and this is their passion, and this is what they love, and they really want to change the world. They care about self-sovereign identity. They care about the economic agency and identity. They care about preservation of privacy. They care about a data economy where large brokers don't own you. They care about human rights. And they want Cardano to be the vehicle to ensure that those are guaranteed, and it's uncompromising. It can't have VC control. It can't have a government walk in and say, go reverse the ledger or do something or else there's consequences. It has to be ideologically pure because it's for everybody, not just one group of people. And it's really insulting for all those people to basically say everything you're doing is a scam, a lie, doesn't exist. I'm sorry, that's not okay. And we're going to rise up as a community, I think, once decentralized governance is fully enabled. And it's going to become a large budget priority to every single year make sure we get fair and accurate representation.
crush the FUD with strong marketing and proof in the pudding, which is the tech that you guys are building out.
100%.
Charles, Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin? You kind of shared some. And speaking of I think you said the cult of Satoshi. Do you think Bitcoin will remain the OG, the big daddy, the top dog? Or do you think that there's going to be a time where it gets flipped and it won't have as much notoriety, won't have as much interest as it currently does today?
I think it's fading already. I mean, Bitcoin dominance is teetering at 50%. Every time I check it, it changes. But vast majority of the project's value flow and just brain trust lives outside of Bitcoin. And this was why I left the Bitcoin ecosystem. I started in Bitcoin, and I was there when Satoshi was still around. So I've been in the space longer than 99% of people who hold Bitcoin, and to the extent where I know the original co-founder, the original core developers like Mike Hearn and others, first name basis. I have emails from him. Okay, so it's like I've been around, and we actually do proof of work research. We did NEPA POWs, for example, non-interactive proofs of proof of work, log-space mining, useful proof of work. There's so many things that Bitcoin could do to preserve and reinforce the original intent, but massively enhance the quality of the system. Like Plutus and Extended UTXO, for example, is the spiritual successor to the UTXO model. But it gives you smart contracts. You preserve what Satoshi wanted to achieve, but he couldn't achieve. He tried. He tried to have a programmable scripting language. He fucked it up, and there was the inflation bug and other problems. And it was catastrophically problematic. And so they just canceled that and kept it simple. But Blockstream is gradually chasing it a bit. You know, they have Jets, and they wrote Simplicity and these other things to try to achieve that. But you know, but there's no desire to innovate. Color coins were another great example. This is how you do multi-asset in a UTXO system. We took the color coins idea, and that became native multi-asset for Cardano. And we just pulled it into the core of the ledger, enhanced it, rewrote it, made it better, and put some novel new ideas for sustainability and scalability. But now there's 8 million assets issued on Cardano. 8 million. Bitcoin could have 1 billion at this point had they adopted that standard. But there's no desire to innovate. So what are you going to do? Just sit and be the most expensive paperweight where you're not upgrading, you're not innovating. They say, oh, well, that's the feature, not the bug. Okay. Well, then for that one use case, which is digital gold, that's what you're going to be. But you're going to miss self-sovereign identity, NFTs, DeFi, voting. You're going to miss CBDCs that are ethical. You're going to miss asset-backed stablecoins, algorithmic stablecoins. You're going to miss supply chain. You're going to miss IoT. You're going to miss basically everything except for digital gold. Okay, and if that's all you want to be and that's all you're going to be, fine. But why the fuck do you believe you're going to be number one on CoinMarketCap? Why the fuck do you believe you're going to still be the top dog and the gold standard and these types of things? The other thing is that's so insanely frustrating with Bitcoin maximalism is they lie. Because they're either it's on purpose or they're idiots, but when they say that proof of stake is not secure, it is a lie. It's a provable lie. There are hundreds of research papers by dozens of projects with tens of thousands of citations running live. In the case of Cardano, 5 years, 2,100 days plus of uptime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never been forked, never been hacked. As a case study, being attacked every single day, millions of people there. Ethereum at scale, look at where they're at. They're running. And when they say that that's no better than a central bank, it's completely centralized, it's a total lie, and the founders can rewrite the system at any time, it's a lie. It's just a straight up lie. But they say this. Why? Because the inconvenient truth is if those systems work, why do you have to justify spending so much electricity to maintain consensus? You can't. So you have to, the only way you can live in this world is to believe that other thing can't be real. It doesn't exist. So I'm sorry, you don't succeed in technology, in society, when you have a product where you basically have created a religion around design choices that were made that were best available as of 2008 and 9. You now have no change management system to upgrade the system. You lie about all the innovations that have come afterwards. You're unwilling to adopt any of those innovations. And at the end of the day, all you can do is just send tokens around. There's no programmability. And everything else has to be done in a layer 2 where it's hyper-centralized. Mm-hmm. It's just nuts, you know? And you have this conversation with them and they're like, well, you're just a shitcoiner and this thing. It's like, okay, if you build a robotic horse and I'm racing it with a car, I think I'm going to win.
Charles, FUD, lies. We always say at WCT that a critical catalyst to mass adoption is education. What needs to be done to debunk some of these lies, these myths, this FUD, so people really understand the truth? Otherwise, I don't think
you don't have to, because cults are cults. It's like you can't, once a person has decided to believe a conspiracy theory or a crazy idea, there is no reality where you're going to convince them otherwise unless they have a come to Jesus moment themselves. So the problem is everybody who's drinking the Kool-Aid on that side of the aisle, you're not going to be able to educate them out of it because we've already done the work to educate them out of it. When you have peer-reviewed papers with literally thousands of citations that have been around for 8+ years, like GKL Model or Reverse Classic or others, and there are academic institutions that are training graduate students and using these as case studies of good research, I'm sorry, the ship has sailed. That works. And when you have these things fully implemented, millions of people using them every single day and writing textbooks about them and these things, I'm sorry that the education's already there. The problem is that the person is unwilling to even acknowledge that exists. It's like these people who believe the earth is only 5,000 years old. Or Flat Earth Society. You can't go to them and be like, well, I do my own research. What you could do is literally get a hot air balloon and like a really high altitude balloon and put a camera on it and show the curvature of the earth. They'll think you doctored the video, even though they launched the balloon themselves, because they're convinced in their belief. And it's not a rational belief. It's a religious belief. Okay. They have it on faith and it's a purity test. And that over time, though, the tent gets smaller and smaller because the fair weather people who kind of half believe it, they watch everything else and they start playing the other things. They go over to that side. And then what happens is that the core becomes more radical. And eventually no one is pure enough for that particular core. You see this a lot in race-based politics. It's like you could say, oh, there's this master race or something like this. And there's got one guy got 0.02% of non-white inside them or something like that. And then they say, oh, I'm sorry, you have to leave the club because we did a DNA test. In fact, there was this thing in America where these white supremacy groups were doing like 23andMe. And the vast majority of the people who were white supremacists discovered they had a little African blood. And they got excommunicated. So it's like you have these dudes that are like Nazis for 30 years and said these crazy KKK things. And then suddenly they got like the tattoos and the shit. They get kicked out.
Oh, God.
Because they're sorry, you're contaminated. You're no longer pure. Well, that's literally what's happening here. It's like there's this ideological purity behind these insane concepts that are just wonky. And basically, people will double down on them and they'll self-kick out tons of members. They did this with Gavin Andresen. They did this with Mike Hearn. They did this with Roger Ver. I knew Roger before the Bitcoin Cash days. He was the most loyal Bitcoin evangelist you'd ever meet in your life. One time he went to, during a Bitcoin conference, he got his hair cut, went to a coffee shop, went to a restaurant. He refused to leave any of these places until they accepted Bitcoin for payment. Get his hair cut, you got to take Bitcoin. Okay, and then he was a machine. He'd do one interview after another interview after another. Bitcoin is the way. Bitcoin is the way. They fired him. He was a big blocker. Sorry, you're not part of the club. So he created Bitcoin Cash and went down that whole road. But it's like he was one of the key figures along with Eric Voorhees and a few others, of the growth of Bitcoin. But he became inconvenient to that cult core and got excommunicated. And now he's the Antichrist. We can't talk to Roger Ver. He's an evil scammer. He's a nice guy. Super disciplined guy too. So, you educate the willing, and what you do is success is the ultimate educator. You just build and you get all kinds of things onto the system, and you wake up and you have 1 billion users. They have 1 million users. There's an exclusive thing, and you have to pass a purity test to be a member, and then they keep firing their people because no one's pure enough. The other is an open tent where very diverse ideas are welcome. And also think about what you're saying. If you own ADA, what he's saying is like you can be part of Intersect, you can vote, you can become a D-rep and actually have influence and control over the entire evolution of the system. And if you leave and come back 5 years later, the system is going to preserve your property rights so that ADA you have is still there. But by the way, now it does 10 times as much stuff. And there's a larger community and there's a lot more cool things going on. You buy Bitcoin, you have no vote, you have no say. You don't have the ability to control the ledger because that's proof of work, and those are mercenaries, and they don't care if it's Bitcoin or anything else. It's whatever's the most profitable thing to mine, and the technology will be exactly the same. So that's literally what you're saying. And so which one, if you're a normal human being functioning who's not indoctrinated, would you pick? You'd pick the one that is more creative, more open, has lots of cool, interesting things happening where you can do real stuff. Because why would you join a cult? It just doesn't make any sense to me. The other thing is, how do you achieve value stability? You can use algorithmic stablecoins to do that, but you can't do an algorithmic stablecoin on Bitcoin. You have to do it as a layer 2 with a programming model. Okay, so we can do an algorithmic stablecoin on Cardano. There's JED and others. JED will evolve over time. Eventually, somebody's going to crack it, which case that becomes kind of the global currency, the world reserve currency, because it's a value stable instrument that can be built with a basket. And then you can use that for loans. You can use that for payments. And it becomes like what they want to do at the BRICS gold-backed reserve currency. And it's backed by basically a gold standard, ADA, at that point. So that's where you get a billion people. And that's where you get a transcendent economy. And you can get rid of money. And you can replace it with crypto-based money. You can't do that in Bitcoin, but that's literally what Satoshi was trying to do with Bitcoin. So they're actually recusing themselves from their God's vision. That's the craziest part about it. It's almost like that South Park episode where the Catholic Church, basically tries to kill Jesus, because there's like all these radicals that are inside.
Haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it's a crazy episode. It was like the Easter Day one where they had the Easter Bunny and Jesus was in it, and they had the head of the Catholic League and these things, and they actually go against the Pope and they go against Jesus because they're like so radicalized in their beliefs. This is literally the same situation here, where Satoshi had this idea of electronic cash and something that could replace the dollar as the world standard. But the only way you get there is an algorithmic stablecoin, and you can back it by Bitcoin. But the only way to create it is through hyper-centralization of the trusted third parties with the level of programming that they have in the system. Also, your settlement times are so slow. They're 10 minutes. But Lightning solves that. You mean something that's not Bitcoin solves Bitcoin's problem? What's again so crazy, inspiration from Bitcoin, Hydra should be on Bitcoin. The extended UTXO model was built hand in glove with Hydra for channel isomorphism, so that you had a very easy time going from off-chain to on-chain. And all Bitcoin had to do was just slightly upgrade its model, and Lightning would be exponentially simpler to implement. It'll be a lot easier to make it a fast finality payment system. But they can't change their design. It's impossible. So they're stuck. You see, and this is the inside baseball, inconvenient, fucked up truth that the guys who've been around for a really long time, since before it was big, kind of know, and it's why they'll pay lip service and say some things. But then there's this market like the Corys of the world and others who are Bitcoin maximalists. There are now Max Kaiser. I knew him back in the day when he asked me for money to sponsor his show. Okay, Max, but then suddenly now he's Team Orange and we're all shitcoiners, and I'm a bad guy because we took Paycheck Protection Money program for one of our Wyoming businesses. I'm the same as Epstein. Literally said that shit. So, I know these guys, these Maxis, and they don't actually believe what they're saying. They just say it because it's good marketing, and that's what you do. Is you pick a cult of radicalized people. You become influencers within it, you toe the party line, and then you use it to get clicks and get money. But there's no ideological core there because they don't even know what they stand for. They're not going to get cash. I guess they can be a digital gold, great. But you know what? The ESG movement's going to come after them and hit them so hard. And every day they're going to ask why you're burning down a forest to maintain security in your system. And they say, well, that's the only way to do it. Say, well, what about proof of stake? Well, that doesn't exist. And the science ministries of the countries will look at it and be like, no, it does exist and it's real. So yeah, we're not going to let you do that anymore. We've moved beyond steam engines. Okay, we have nuclear reactors now. We don't need that paradigm anymore. We're not going to go clear cut all the forest to basically power your ships and these things.
Charles, I haven't seen that episode of South Park, but my favorite episode of South Park is the World of Warcraft episode. And I am a vanilla World of Warcraft purist. I still play that game. I played it for many years. And what excites me a lot about blockchain technology is the potential for Web3 gaming. I am able to think of WoW and think of it as a perfect use case for Web3 gaming. But I would love to hear in your words, where do you see Web3 gaming going?
Oh, that's a super exciting thing because games have in-game economies. They own people's time. The collectibles are a huge thing inside games, and so metaverse, GameFi, NFTs, that intersection point is an amazing thing. And we even have a company that plays in that space, Reflect. So I'm super excited about it. So in general, what crypto gives a video game is kind of three different things. One, it gives you the ability to create scarcity where normally you don't have scarcity. So when you have a video game, there's an unlimited amount of gold, there's an unlimited amount of items. You can replay the game again and again. It doesn't matter how many hours you put into Baldur's Gate 3, it's still Baldur's Gate 3, and you can reset and restart, and it's the same thing again and again. Well, with NFTs, you can create unique playing experiences that basically only belong to that particular person, and you create items that basically there's only a limited amount of them in the entire dimension of all the game. So only 10,000 people get this axe. That's it, forever. In Baldur's Gate 3, for example, 22,000 years of playtime amongst all the players in the last month. 200 million hours. So that's big, But what if only 10% of them got some special experience because they're part of the club and they earned their way into it? So those mechanics are super powerful and they're extremely exciting. And there's a lot of good companies going around that are trying to figure out how to make that turnkey for game developers and plug it into middleware like Unity and Unreal and CryEngine. The other thing is that real estate and MMOs, this idea of a shared space amongst millions of people like World of Warcraft or EVE Online, you can create real estate scarcity, these types of things. So that spatial web concept that people have been floating around. There's even a good book called Spatial Web that talks about this concept. You really can start creating this concept of like a meta world where you have the world of worlds. It's almost like that Ready Player One where all the games were nested inside this thing.
Love it.
You literally can realize that. And the only way to do that is with crypto because you need a trusted bulletin board for the namespace, the property rights, and these types of things. So you need a blockchain for this type of structure. So that's the other dimension. And then the final dimension is this area where basically you have a different way of funding projects. The biggest problem in game development, it suffers the same problem with a lot of creative endeavors where middlemen come in, they get enormous influence and control, and then they basically become the gatekeepers for who gets to be creative and who doesn't. It's why you have so many Marvel movies. They're the same movie again and again and again. It's why you have so many sequels and remakes and these types of things. And it's why the music industry, everybody's auto-tuned and you can, copy paste people. It's like, is that Kesha? No, that's the newest thing. It's like
they all sound the same.
They all sound exactly the same because literally they're using AI to make them sound all exactly the same. And all the songs are basically exactly the same. They just get manatees with balls, and just like the South Park episode, and they do that. So that is a problem of financing. It's not a problem of creativity. There's amazingly creative people every day. Those people can't get the money and resources that they need to be able to pursue their projects. And so the game industry is a great example of that. Baldur's Gate 3 was an anomaly. It wasn't the rule. It was the exception to it because they used the early release model to give them so much money. They sold 2.5 million copies that allowed them to do a 6-year development cycle to get Baldur's Gate done exactly the way they wanted. If a traditional game studio was their publisher for Larian, what they would have done is been like, no, you have to release in 3 years. You got to cut all this content. You can't have bear sex in the game. You can't do this thing. You can't do that. It's like they just really compromised the whole. Actually, it did happen in that game. They actually compromised the whole creative vision of Baldur's Gate 3. But because they had community financing, they basically had the freedom to do whatever the fuck they want. In fact, the guy who ran the studio got so crazy, he was literally walking around in armor in the office. I got like a picture of this shit. It's one of the craziest things, man. So that is. Let me find this picture.
Sure.
Yeah, but that is just an example of the third category, which is if you change the way that these games get financed and you change the way that these games operate, then what ends up happening is you get thousands of people start doing ridiculously creative things, and those ridiculously creative things end up basically becoming the next big hits, and it makes it fun to. I'll show you the picture later. It makes it fun to kind of year by year come back to it and see it. Like I hadn't really played a video game in a long time, and then I waited 20 years for a sequel to Baldur's Gate. And I just assumed it was going to go through the normal creator model, and so I said, "Oh, it's going to be shit." And then it comes out, and I'm like, "Holy shit! This is probably one of the greatest CRPGs of all time." And instead of the gaming industry saying we should compete with this and become like this, like when Diablo 2 came out, there was an enormous amount of copycats like Titan Quest and others that were trying to capture. And Grim Dawn, I think, is the closest spiritual successor to Diablo 2, not Diablo 3 or 4. But they tried to capture that magic. Instead, the game industry wrote all these negative articles like Baldur's Gate 3 is an anomaly, you can't achieve it, there's no way to maintain it. Meanwhile, these guys are fucking going at it. They just released a patch 2 days ago, 1,000 bug fixes inside the patch. The changelog is so big they couldn't even post it on Steam. They're just going for it, and that's because they figured out a way to break the matrix and have their own financing model. Well, what crypto does is it puts that on steroids. It supercharges the whole thing. Suddenly, if you have a creative idea, you can build a community around that creative idea and wake up and you have $10 million of project capital to go and pursue that idea that nobody in their right mind would give you at a game studio. And you can kind of work there. And the other thing is you can work with your community to co-build it. Baldur's Gate did this, the early release model. They had millions of people over a 2.5-year period basically playing that game for millions of hours, and they learned how to balance the gameplay mechanics. They learned how to polish it, and those people were willing to co-work with that because they wanted to see that product exist. So it's a really good proto model, but it still lives in a centralized world. You see. So the key is with GameFi is to get that there, and then I think the next wave of games we get will be so much better, so much more interesting, and just frankly kill the major studios in the game markets. Plus, why use a studio? They take all this money, they tell you what to do, and they don't provide any value. It's like distribution. You don't need them for distribution or marketing or any of these things anymore.
I could talk to you about this for days. I appreciate you going over the allotted time. And I want to thank Annie so much for helping put this together. I hope that we can connect again in the future because I still wanted to ask you about meme tokens. I wanted to ask you about your restaurant, anti-aging hospital, and your search for aliens. So a lot to discuss, Charles.
We got a paper on that coming out in like a week or two.
Well, I can't wait to read it.
We found some shit.
I can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're in the camp that I am. You believe that there are extraterrestrial civilizations somewhere out there.
Well, we found some, so we'll talk about it. And we're just checking it at Harvard right now, but it's pretty cool. So you just you guys wait.
Beautiful. If you have any closing thoughts for our community, go ahead and share them now. Otherwise, Charles, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate your time today.
Go build some stuff, guys. That's what it's all about. You own it as much as I do, and we're all going to get this done together and listen to each other, love each other, take care of each other. Empathy gets you everywhere, and we will get this done one way or the other. And don't fall into the cults.
Whale Coin Talk community, that was a aquarium special with Charles Hoskinson, the Renaissance man of blockchain. Charles, thank you again for joining.
Cheers.
MG, throw it out, take it out, close it out.